Good afternoon. My name is Zia Quadri. I'm with the Human Resources Office. I also support the Engineering Academy. And I'm filling in for Amanda Knight and Cinda Chellin, who could not be here this afternoon today. I wanted to thank each of you for coming today in support of the FY10 Knowledge Capture Series on spacesuits. Amanda and Cinda have been working really hard to put up a fantastic lineup. And they're hoping that they're going to have training lectures at least once a month to benefit not only our spacesuit engineers, but also the Engineering Academy and our JSC Chief Knowledge Office. Today we have with us Mr. Louis Krug, who will be briefing us on the development of the Chinese EVA spacesuit. Just a quick synopsis. Mr. Krug graduated from the University of Bridgeport, Connecticut in 1984 with 2 bachelor's degrees of science in biomedical engineering and electrical engineering. He also entered a Master of Science degree program in biomedical engineering at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. His work career in space systems started at Hamilton Sunstrand in Windsor Locks, Connecticut, and led to working in space life sciences with Krug International Wiley Labs at JSC from 1988 until 2005. Projects included space motion sickness studies, cardiovascular deconditioning studies from prolonged weightlessness, and then on to cellular tissue changes in zero-G as the lead electrical designer on the ISS bioreactor project. Following post-Columbia, he was transferred to Lockheed to support on RCC repair methods. Eventually, he went to work with Jacobs Engineering, providing support to EC5 PLSS hardware development for Constellation. Presently, Mr. Krug is now working as a systems engineer with the Level 3 EVA SE&I group, performing analysis on EVA spacesuit systems. And with that, I'll let Mr. Krug get started.
Thanks. Okay. Before I start talking about the Chinese spacesuits, I want to just give a quick preamble on the Chinese space program.
Louis, mic's not powered on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Let me start again. I'd like to start off by just giving a preamble on the Chinese space program before I start talking about the suits that they're using for their manned space program. I know a lot of us get so involved in our work here, with whether it's with the Constellation program or our own projects, that we don't really see what's going on the other side of the world as far as their other space programs. And China has a very impressive space program. Since 1996, they've launched 108 successful rocket launches with their Long March series of rockets. And they have had a couple failures, but they had 108 successful launches. And we're talking about a launch every 40 days. You know, it's almost once a month. And China is also presently putting up 35 global positioning satellites to compete with the U.S. GPS network so that they have complete global coverage. They actually just started this program. They've got 3 up there now, and the plan is for 35. They also have customers for launching satellites. Some of the present customers include Brazil, Indonesia, Pakistan, and I think even Nigeria. And also another impressive thing is they have 4 launch control centers. They have 4 centers where they actually launch the rockets on. The 4th one is actually under construction. It's at the southernmost tip of China. Actually, it's on an island just south of China. And that's going to be used for their heavy lift rocket launches. The reason they're building that right now is because it's as close to the equator as they can get, because they use the Earth's motion to assist the launch. The Chinese feel that they're going to get a 14% increase in payload capacity. And some other things that they've done, they've launched a satellite that orbited the moon, and to map out the surface of the moon. And they're continuing. They've got 2 launches, one for a rover and one for a sample return to the moon. So it's an impressive program. And they're also presently building a heavy lift launcher which can lift a 50,000 pound payload which is comparable to what the shuttle can launch. And that's due in 2014. Now how does this affect us? Where are we in all this? I mean, obviously it might affect the economy a bit because they're trying to grab a share of the market for launching satellites for the rest of the world. It might affect how we view national security. It might even affect NASA's vision for the future. And because we're looking at, from the NASA side, we're slowing down on support for the space station and supposedly going to stop support in the year 2020. Whereas China has plans to put up their own space station by 2020. And as a matter of fact, they're putting up a space lab within the next year. They've got 2 modules to be launching towards the end of 2010, and then another manned mission in 2011 to live aboard that space module. And they're going to be practicing docking maneuvers in preparation for building their space station. And they also have plans in parallel for going on a manned mission to the moon around that same time frame. So when we look at the U.S. with the Constellation program being cut and support for ISS going to be cut in 2020, are we even going to have a manned vehicle by 2020? You know, never mind not have the space station anymore. So it's almost like there's an inversion of power, or I should say space leadership that's going on. So it might be something that, you know, we need to continue to look at to monitor and maybe give us another direction on what to do with our space program. But being from the EVA world, my topic is going to be on the EVA side, or the manned program that China has started. Oops. Now the Chinese had their first EVA. They had a manned launch before this, but the manned EVA was September 27th in 2008. And at that time, there wasn't any information on the Chinese spacesuits. It was a short EVA, lasted about 18 minutes. There's more proof of concept in public relations, and you can see one of their taconauts there waving the Chinese flag. What they do in 18 minutes, they released a satellite that was mounted on their spacecraft. It was just a small 88-pound satellite that actually they put into orbit around their spacecraft, and it would take video of their spacecraft from every angle of their EVA. And they also had some solid lubricant experiment going on for some future motion control experiments for later on. Now it was noticed that the suits looked a lot like the Orlan in the beginning. And in fact, one of the suits was the Orlan. There were 2 crew members that were involved in this EVA, though only one of them really exited the hatch. The one that stayed behind and fed out the umbilical, he was in the Orlan, and that was more as a backup to their new suit, just in case anything would happen. They had already a proven Orlan suit that they felt safe in. They could pull the crew member back in. Now the suits, the name of the suits is the Fei Tian, which means flying in the sky. Actually, Fei means fly. Tian I believe is a female form of the word sky. They also name a Buddhist goddess of that name. And then there was noticed there was a contract between the Chinese and Russia where the Chinese purchased 9 suits and also some 4 sets of docking systems. Now of the 9 suits they purchased, 3 were Orlans, 2 were their launch entry suits, or the Sokol suits, as the Russians call them, and they had 4 for underwater training. Now just for For those who are unfamiliar with the suits, we did a comparison of the Phaeton versus the NASA EMU. And again, we had to speculate that the Phaeton was very similar to the Orlan when we did this, being they used the Orlan technology to develop their suit. Now, I know that the Orlan suits are more one-size-fits-all. They do have sizing straps that bring in the arms and legs, whereas the EMU can fit up to, is made to fit 5 to 95 percentile people. And also another thing is that the Russian suits were certified for 15 uses or 4 years, and then they discard them, whereas the EMU now can go to up to 25 years. Originally it was 15 years or 100 EVAs, but it's been extended as long as maintain maintenance on it. As far as the Chinese EVA suits, they didn't bring them back. They discarded them following their mission. Another difference is that the nominal pressure in Orlan is 5.7 psi, and so it's assumed that's what it is in the Chinese suits. Another difference with the EMU is that the life support system in Orlan is located in the suit itself in the 100% oxygen environment. And on the EMU, of course, it's external in the Bliss. The Orlan does use a liquid cooling garment and a sublimator, just as the same as the EMU. And also the Orlan is made to do autonomous EVA, and it has umbilical capability, and that's what the Phaeton used during this EVA. Now, being a lot like the Orlan, when I was looking through some bulletin boards online, I noticed there was a lot of, I want to say, dissatisfied people. They had the attitude they were looking for new, innovative technology, advanced spacesuit, and when they saw it was very much like the Orlan, there wasn't a very good attitude about it. So that's the reason I threw this slide in, because Leroy Chiao, who is one of the American astronauts from Expedition 10, he went to China and did get to see the suits, and he had a more positive outlook on it. And I'd like to read that really quick. He says, "I was impressed with the suit. It has obvious Russian Orlan heritage with some differences. The display and control module looks similar, as did the pressure regulators and the oxygen injector switch. The hatch latching mechanism also looks similar, and so did the umbilical interfaces. In fact, it is reasonable to assume that the spacecraft interfaces are identical to the Russian system, since the second suit worn by Lou Boming was in fact an Orlan. And there's nothing wrong with this approach," he says. "It is arguably optimal to take an existing design and improve upon it while retaining the critical systems that are proven. In my view, China is taking a very logical course in developing their manned space capability." Now, how do they differ? What changes did the Chinese perform on the Orlan to make it the Phaeton? So we tried to look at that. A lot of the analysis really was from the video downlinks, because there still was very little information out there on what the Chinese were doing. But just from the video, looking at the display and control module, it was noticed that the pressure gauge, which normally is on the sleeve on the Russian Orlan, is on the DCM here. Another change noticed was the temperature control knob on the Orlan was changed on the Phaeton from a sliding switch to a rotating knob. Then there was the helmet as well. In an article from a Chinese newspaper, they claim that the visor was larger than the Orlan helmet. That was one of the changes. And we assume the helmet is built onto the torso, because it was, like I said, based on the Orlan design, versus the EMU, which of course the helmet is removable. Another difference is on the Orlan, they have a moon roof. That's why I put that picture on the far right, where on the Phaeton they did not have that. I did find a description on the helmet in an interview with Lou Goning, that he mentioned it has 4 layers, and 2 of the layers are sealed with a nitrogen gas flowing in between it. And he mentioned some of the properties such as the heat and sound insulating, and they also have visor anti-fogging and ventilation, just like we do. And the gloves look very similar to the Orlan gloves and the Sokol gloves. As far as the umbilical interface, it was hard to find any information on the umbilical, but I did find an article that mentioned that they had it was just for providing power and communications to the suit, and one tube that would carry emergency oxygen. And in that article they also mentioned the lengths of two umbilicals they carried. So I'm assuming one is the shorter length umbilicals for the crew member inside, and the longer for the one doing the EVA. And from the video it looked like the interface control panel was the same as the Russians. Now here is Lou Goning in an interview talking further about some of the differences. He said that they use digital technology in the design versus the Russians, who just basically used simulation technology, and that the image data and information collection they used digital signals. Second, they use the CDMA technology, code division multiple access network. For those who don't know what that is, that's on the newer cell phones like Blackberries, iPhone. Sprint talks about using that format, and basically allows you to do multiple things on your phone. You can talk, download, pass data all at the same time. And thirdly, one of the differences from the Orlan is the design of the IVA suit. He claims that the elbow and knee joints of the Phaeton are softer than those of the Russian version. Now that's all the differences I have between the Orlan and the Phaeton. Now I want to go into the training facilities they have over in China. Apparently they're very similar to the Russians. They've, I guess, as Chuck Fulcher has mentioned, when he went on a trip to Russia and they saw the Chinese over there at the Russian space complex, and at that time the Russians were training them and giving them help in planning their EVA, and apparently they have built their training facilities very similar to what the Russians have. The Russians were consultants in helping them in their program. And here you can almost, from the back, you can see the Orlan on the right and the Phaeton on the left. They look almost identical from the back. And this is them in front of a vacuum chamber. Now they also have built a huge pool, their Hydra lab over in China. And this is 10 meters deep, 23 meters wide. I had a video I was going to show you, but the link seemed to have been removed over the past month, so I couldn't get it back. Here, now remember I mentioned they bought 9 suits from the Russians, and 4 of them were Orlans for underwater training. Now here are 2 Orlan suits, and you can tell by the moonroof on the helmet. And that third picture to the right gives you an idea of the depth, about 30 feet or 10 meters. Now I have a video of them going out the hatch that I want to play. Okay, let's set this up. Now this one is in Chinese. I'm only going to play this one for a short while, then I'm going to switch over to the one in English. Now watch, he's trying to open the hatch, he's having difficulty. And notice how it closes right back up again. It's hard to get all the pressure out. Actually, the same thing happened in Apollo 11. They couldn't get all the pressure out the dump valve because they had a biocide filter in between trying to prevent germs from getting on the moon at the time. And it kept just enough pressure in that they couldn't pull the hatch out. As soon as they open the hatch, I'll switch to the English version, because that one was a little different. They had additional video segments, shorter segments. Now, what we're looking at here, you know, granted, this is the first time, it's trial and error. Things that they're noticing now is they need additional handrails to grab onto to pull on that hatch. And of course, there you'll see something flying out. All right.
This is the previous recordings of Zhangjiang.
Now this also is Chinese TV. That CCTV you see in the upper left is Chinese Central TV. It's just that they also have an English version of their news.
The hatch into the outer space. I believe this is the recording of 14 o'clock when Zhangjiang was checking every part of the ZVA spacesuit. And this is the moment that he is about to open the hatch and turn a handle.
This is where he's having a hard time getting it open.
And the ground control is having a good mark on Zhangjiang's performance, how he did the EVA. We just saw something flying out of the
That's like a paper
stuff.
Paper.
It's a piece of paper?
Yeah, I think maybe it's the I hope it's not their check.
Yeah, I hope it's not something that they cherish, like the letters from their families or the photos of his daughter or something. Otherwise, it becomes debris.
It wouldn't stay in orbit very long at that
It
point.
wouldn't. It just fall to the ground somewhere.
In fact, it might even survive re-entry. A very thin piece of paper actually has a chance to survive
Really?
re-entry into the atmosphere. Yes.
You mean a light object can survive the re-entry, not burn?
I don't know how true that is.
But this is typically recording the whole process of the EVA. We now see...
Yeah, they'll use two tethers.
The EVA...
There you can see the mirror on his wrist for reading the DCM.
You get his hand on the handlebar installed on the outside of the spaceship. So what is the use of the hook that he's using to attach himself, attach the tether to the body of the spaceship? What is the use of the hook?
I would have to guess, but it appears that he's attaching in two places.
Yeah.
And if you're attached in two places, then you can position yourself by pulling on one or the other of the ropes.
And also it ensures your safety, right?
Yeah. It's a double insurance policy.
Double insurance. Because the Chinese ground control has always been asserting the importance of reliability and safety.
Yes. There used to be a sort of a mythology that the Russians took terrible risks in space. And as a matter of fact, they were extremely careful. With the sole exception of Moscow.
Now you can notice they're controlling the temperature from the liquid, from the liquid cooling garment. You can see the knob here on the right at the center of the screen.
And now he's just letting himself float. Because actually spacewalk
notice there's quite a bundle of
is
cables.
not the exact word. It should be space float.
Yes, that would be better.
Because we don't have any solid ground to walk on. And now
course, there's the Orlan.
Actually, then, several minutes ago, he unfurled the Chinese national flag. This is a very symbolic moment, of course. It is actually made of, embroidered by those Chinese craftsmen here back on the ground. And of course, boosted the morale of the whole bunch of people working behind this project.
Looks like the flag was not tethered.
And this
Yeah.
should be a very big acknowledgement of the Chinese
That was
nation.
your symbolic moment.
Because they have a Chinese flag waving forever. And that might have been their solid lubricant experiment he's grabbing there.
Yeah, we just see because in first see that maybe those the
So some of the scenes that we actually haven't seen during a live broadcast is captured by the other cameras.
And of course, the third crew member
And
stays
this
behind
is
in
the shot
the
of cosmonaut
service, not the service
taikonaut
module, so he's landing module.
who stayed in the re-entry module. He is the man left behind, but he is a very important guy.
During the Apollo missions, the man who stayed aboard the command module in orbit around the moon was at sometimes 6,000 kilometers away from the nearest human being.
That's very far.
Very lonely.
Did he feel secure enough?
He was lonely. It was Mike Collins on this.
So all the taikonauts, astronauts, cosmonauts should have a sense of loneliness in space because they're so far away from the home, in their home away from the home.
Okay. All right, so as I said at the beginning, a lot of the distinctions between the two suits, the differences, came from video analysis, and some notes from this video other than he was struggling with the hatch, missing a handrail or two that they could have had. Other things, notice that they use a EVA mirror just like we do. Or even another thing, notice that even a slight pressure on the door makes it hard to open. And I remember reading about during Apollo 11, and I think it might have been Apollo 12 as well, the pressure was below 1 psi. It was down in the neighborhood of 0.5. It still was very difficult to, it only takes a little bit of pressure on that large surface area of the hatch to hold it closed. We noticed a lot of stuff flying out of the airlock, so they'll probably look at that and next time probably try to tie things down better, put them in bags. And there was a difference noticed between the Russian hatch and the Chinese hatch. The Russian had two handles in the middle to grab onto. The Chinese hatch only had actually one handle. This is more what you just saw. There is some curiosity. I mean, how do they undock before they, come back home with all those cables? That's kind of a mystery. Now, some of the claims from their newspaper articles on characteristics of the spacesuit, I tried to collect those on one slide here. They say the Phaeton weighs about 264 pounds, and they claim it's very supple, I should say. They can bend down and, well, of course, one claim was you could bend down and pick a coin up with it, but I think what I've read about their gloves, that's probably not true. They mentioned it costs about $4.4 million for each spacesuit. And again, the outer part of their spacesuit is has fire resistance. I don't know about their claim about radiation resistance. They might have just been boasting. Maybe it has minimal. And of course, it protects them from the extreme cold. And they also mentioned that the suits can be donned by occupants ranging from 5 foot 3 inches to 5 foot 11 inches. And the other characteristic that we got out of all of it was it took them about 11 to 12 hours to get it all unpacked and assembled and ready. And the pre-breathe time was approximately 100 minutes. So I remember them mentioning that the EVA was really about 2 hours and 40 minutes but outside of the hatch was only about 18 minutes. Now, just to give you an idea what the spacecraft looks like, this is where the tachonauts come out of their launch entry module, and they go into their, well, it's their living quarters there, their lab, which is also an airlock. Now, it looks a lot like the Russian Soyuz. China claims what they've used the same design, but they've increased the size by 13%, 13% more volume. They thought by doing this they can probably get a fourth crew member in, though they haven't done that yet. And another difference they claim is that on their laboratory module / airlock module, they have put solar panels and a propulsion system on there, which the Russians don't have. So that way, when they undock and they come back home, the laboratory module will continue to orbit and they can control it from the ground.
What the cabin pressure was in the Shenzhou spacecraft?
No, I have not mentioned that, actually. I probably have not run across that. I don't know what it is in the Soyuz. Is it normally 14.7 or in the Soyuz? I would imagine it's going to be similar to what the Soyuz is.
Well,
but I know it's higher than 8.7.
Soyuz, I mean,
pardon?
I mean, just I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, obviously when it docked with the station, but I don't know if they launch at a lower pressure during launch, like Apollo did, and we kind of had a little bit oxygen rich, and then you slowly bleed down the oxygen to when you get.
Well,
anyway, because you said
I could speculate it is ambient 14.7 because the suit pressure is 5.7 and they used 100 minutes of pre-breathe. So
I guess you could work it backwards to find out what is safe.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's a good question. I'm mostly focused on the suits, so I didn't really look into characteristics of their spacecraft other than some of the differences. Basically, this is just what I was talking about. They claim it was bigger and includes a propulsion system and solar panels on their laboratory module. As far as their launch entry suits, they did buy 2 Sokols from the Russians, and they claim to have then copied them or produced their own. Now, one thing about the Sokol and the Shenzhou pressure suit is what they call it. They have that big regulator, pressure regulator, right on their chest. That's what that knob is you see on there. And the reason for that is because if they did have a cabin depress, their suit would automatically inflate to and hold pressure at 8.7 psi. But the suit isn't made to be mobile at 8.7, and it tends to balloon out as well. So if they need to get that mobility to perform an operation in a state of emergency, they have the option of turning that regulator and bringing it down to 3.9 psi, risking getting the bends, but they will do that because it's an emergency to, and then turn it back, get the pressure back up again. But that's what that is. And they are very lightweight. They're about 22 pounds, the Sokol suits. All right, so I'm going to go from there to how they came back once they put on their Shenzhou suits, their launch entry suits. They start coming back down. It looks quite a bit like the way the Russians come back down. They do land on land, and China immobilizes about 300 search and rescue workers on this mission, including air and land forces. And they landed in some territory just, I think it was north of China, just towards they call the grasslands of Mongolia. Okay, here it shows them finally hitting the ground. I did find an article that they do have thrusters to assist them, just like the Russians do, to cushion the landing when they're just a meter above the ground. On the right, it comes down at, so it comes down at an angle. It turns on the side intentionally. That opening is not where they come out. That opening you see there on the right is where the parachute actually comes out to give them that angle. Here the technicians are starting to open the hatch to get the technicians out. You can see them in that small opening. Get an idea how crammed they are in there. Here they take them out. They put them in the seats just like the Russians do, just in case they still need a time to get their sea legs. They don't want their heroes falling down or tripping.
Does he have his leg crossed? Or is that just...
Yeah, well, he's in his suit is depressurized. So. Well, the launch entry suits are very mobile, and the Chinese do claim to have softened the elbows and knees more than the Sokol. Now, they have monitoring stations across the globe as well to get full coverage. They have 13 monitoring and controlling stations and ships deployed. There's a picture here of one of their ships, the Wanwang vessel. They have it on 3 oceans. They have 5 stationary measuring stations in the territory of China, and a mobile measuring station, and 3 monitoring and controlling stations in other countries, including one in Melinda of Kenya. The additional station in that area between Namibia and Karachi increases the monitoring time by about 4 minutes. So that's some high-tech ships. Now, as far as their future plans, at the end of 2010, they'll be launching, and the beginning of 2011, 2 modules. One will be a laboratory module, and the other one will be a service module. The first thing, proof of concept that they're going to try to do is to dock them. They're trying to develop the technique for docking. Once they're successfully docked, then the 3rd mission in that same year of 2011 will be sending 3 more taconauts up there to live in the laboratory. One of them, the plan is for one of them to be the first female astronaut, and they've already chosen her. And then once they've got the docking maneuvers proven, then they're going to go into start assembling a space station, and they want to have one by 2020. Now they also have, in parallel, they have a moon landing planned. I mentioned earlier at the beginning they had already had one orbiter, a lunar orbiter, that mapped the lunar surface, and then they practiced crashing it into the lunar surface to try to practice maneuvering it and locating a spot they would like when they would want to do if they were landing a craft. They have a second orbiter going up within the next year, and then they have a rover and a sample return mission in line behind it. So they're moving right along on that area too, and they're not limited to one landing facility. I mentioned in the beginning they have actually four launch facilities. When I said landing facility, I'm sorry, I meant launch facility. So they've got different projects going on at the same time. This is their new Long March 5 heavy lift rocket due in 3 years from now, or 4 years from now, at 2014. This is the one they were going to use for, well, the plan is to use this for their lunar missions. This has a capability of carrying 50,000 pounds of payload, which is comparable to the space shuttle. The space shuttle, I think last I heard, was 53,600 pounds payload capacity. So it's right on around the same. And they're going to launch this from their new launch facility on that island on the southern tip of China. As I mentioned earlier, the closer they get to the equator, using the Earth to the motion of the Earth to assist the launch, they'll get more payload capacity that way. That's their plan. Now this is their vehicle assembly building, and when I saw this, I had to create a slide because it is identical to ours. Ours is on the bottom left of the screen. Theirs right above it. Now when I saw that, and then they have a crawler to bring their rocket to the launch pad, just as us too, because as you know, the Russians put theirs on a rail car horizontally out to the pad, and then they lift it. So you would think having a rocket with a Soyuz-like laboratory or spaceship on the top, they would probably be moving it and doing things similar to the Russians. But it's almost like a mix of Russian technology and know-how and American technology and know-how. Even their launch tower is a lot more like ours than it is than the Russians. I think I have a picture of right here. There's the Chinese Long March launch system on the left, and there's the Russian Soyuz launch system on the right. So it's interesting the way they're doing it. This slide was just the mission specifics of their first EVA, which is what this whole presentation was about. The whole duration was 68 hours, 27 minutes. They had 45 orbits. On their Shenzhou 7 mission, Shenzhou 8 and 9 are the ones I mentioned going up late 2010, early 2011. And Shenzhou 10 will be carrying the 3 crew members to that lab, also in 2011. This was an interview with Michael Griffin when they asked him about the Chinese space program, and he predicted the moon mission by 2015. That might be a little optimistic, but they're going to have their rocket ready in 2014, and when they do, they're going to try to, they're talking about launching a vessel directly to the moon, kind of like we do with the Saturn V. We decided last minute, well, instead of putting it in low Earth orbit, let's just see if we can go to the moon and come back, and they took a risk. So they're thinking, so that's why I think Michael Griffin was expecting, as soon as they get that rocket up, they're just going to, maybe use it to send one of their sample return missions to the moon. Let's see. I mentioned they had sent a probe to the moon. This was just one of the articles I included if anybody wanted to reference any article on it. They talk about a 3-step moon exploration strategy on here. Their lunar plans call for a soft landing on the moon of a rover around 2012, which is what I mentioned. And the third phase is to use another rover to snag lunar samples and then return them to the Earth. Here it says in 2017. And here was China to launch second moon probe in 2009. So that's, I believe that's now going to be 2010. I don't think that has been launched yet. Now they did have a launch in January that failed. And it was our Long March 3, I think it was, in their series of rockets. And it actually, something about where the Chinese launched their rockets, this one happens to be in the northern part in the center of the country, and like here we put our launch centers on a coast to make sure we don't fly them over civilian populations. They knew there was a risk doing it, and the one that crashed onto a city actually in January, it had hydrazine fuel that that spread across the, I can't remember what the building was, but it got a number of people very ill. And I don't think it was this one, though. I think it was a different mission. This was just, I was going to put some more information. This is our last slide. I was going to have more information on their launch entry suit, but I think I talked it already. And the only reason I was going to put the slide in is because we were working on our own launch entry suit. And one of the things I noticed on here was what I mentioned, that if they did have a cabin depress, they do regulate the pressure to 8.7 psi. Unless and plus they have the capability of lowering that for mobility if they have to.
Did you say that they purchased the Sokol, or
They purchased 2 Sokol suits. They did both. They purchased 2 suits, and then they made their own, designed after the Sokol, with some minor changes in the elbows and knees, apparently.
The ones that were flown were Chinese made then?
Pardon?
The ones that flew were Chinese made?
One of each, wasn't there? Isn't that what you said?
Well, for the Orlan, for the EVA suits, they had one of each. A Chinese-made suit and in the Orlan as a backup, in case their suit, something was they overlooked or whatever. But as far as the Sokol suits, I don't know that. I'm assuming they flew their own, but I don't know. Because they flew a manned mission before this as well, they just didn't do an EVA.
So the person in the all-on suits will be was a Chinese or a Russian?
No, they were all Chinese. The Russians were EVA consultants on the ground, so they were there in their launch control center to give support in case they were needed. Okay. Well, that ends the slideshow. Now, I mentioned they are launching rockets almost once a month successfully since 1996. So they're a very aggressive space program. So even though we're talking about a first manned EVA from them, it's expected that this momentum is going to continue. So mainly what I presented here is I'm showing you what the momentum is across the other side of the globe, and it's pretty good. And whether it's going to, whether what they do is going to change NASA's policy or NASA's vision, I don't know. Of course, back in the 60s, what Russia did definitely affected the direction of our space program. But anyway, I guess we'll just wait and see. Any questions?
For the space lab, space station, I guess they plan to have full EVA capabilities there too. I guess airlocks and.
Oh, for the Chinese space station? Oh, I don't know. I think it's too early to say. I would expect them to have that capability if they're assembling a space station, but I haven't read anything on it. It's hard to get information on what they're doing. I was able to find some information because searching around, I found information that led me to some Chinese newspapers. And of course, I couldn't translate them, but I used the Google Translator, which is, you can copy and paste sections of articles, and it translates it for you. And some of them I found were interviews with some of the folks from the Chinese Space Agency that were talking about what they had done.
I'm just really surprised that the Russians transferred so much technology to them. I mean,
well,
they sold it.
They sold it. Yeah, they
need the money.
Yeah.
Well,
They were.
Two countries have a history,
almost,
close ties like that with military hardware.
yeah.
Reverse engineering Russian MiGs, and so
Right, a lot of their military jets, and there's some pretty good copies.
It's not a big stretch, I think.
And it's continuing too, because China is also using Germany and France right now to help them build some of the satellites that they're launching. And the whole purpose is to learn the technology. So they're, they'll get it.
The only thing I think, from what I understand, is that the Russian space program is operated by the People's Liberation Army. It's a military program, not a civilian program. So you're transferring technology to a military.
Well, folks, we just ended. It's taking questions. So, any more questions?
During your research, you see any feature they capture from EMU design or anything other than Orlan?
No, I have not seen anything captured from that. I think their focus was to use the Russian Orlan design because they had them in their hands. And since they had started in 2000, well, they received the suits in 2004, 2005, it doesn't give you a lot of time between then and your first DVA, which was in 2008, you know, to look elsewhere. You've got to hold focus on what you've got and try to improve on that.
They already incorporated digital technology into the helmet, right? So it's right.
Yeah, right. But I think that was Orlan technology, and I don't know if it was EMU technology. Is that what you're saying?
I don't think. I think it's just, I think it's the latest technology they have. We use analog. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Systems. And with that, I'll let Mr. Crew get started.
Thanks. Okay. Before I start talking about the Chinese spacesuits, I want to just give a quick preamble on the Chinese space program.
Louis, mic's not powered
Oh,
on.
I'm sorry. Okay. Let me start again. I'd like to start off by just giving a preamble on the Chinese space program before I start talking about the suits that they're using for their manned space program. I know a lot of us get so involved in our work here, with whether it's with the Constellation program or our own projects, that we don't really see what's going on the other side of the world. As far as their other space programs. And China has a very impressive space program. Since 1996, they've launched 108 successful rocket launches with their Long March series of rockets. And they have had a couple failures, but they had 108 successful launches. And we're talking about a launch every 40 days. You know, it's almost once a month. And China is also presently putting up 35 global positioning satellites to compete with the U.S. GPS network so that they have complete global coverage. They actually just started this program. They've got 3 up there now, and the plan is for 35. They also have customers for launching satellites. Some of the present customers include Brazil, Indonesia, Pakistan.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Ciupitu. I'm with the Human Resources Office. I also support the Engineering Academy. And I'm filling in for Amanda Knight and Cinda Chellen, who could not be here this afternoon today. I wanted to thank each of you for coming today in support of the FY10 Knowledge Capture Series on spacesuits. Amanda and Cinda have been working really hard to put up a fantastic lineup. And they're hoping that they're going to have training lectures at least once a month to benefit not only our spacesuit engineers, but also the Engineering Academy and our JSC Chief Knowledge Office. Today we have with us Mr. Louis Krug, who will be briefing us on the development of the Chinese EVA spacesuit. Just a quick synopsis. Mr. Krug graduated from the University of Bridgeport, Connecticut in 1984 with 2 bachelor's degrees of science in biomedical engineering and electrical engineering. He also entered a Master of Science degree program in biomedical engineering at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. His work career in space systems started at Hamilton Sunstrand in Windsor Locks, Connecticut, and led to working in space life sciences with Krug International Wiley Labs at JSC from 1988 until 2005. Projects included space motion sickness studies, cardiovascular deconditioning studies from prolonged weightlessness, and then on to cellular tissue changes in zero-G as the lead electrical designer on the ISS bioreactor project. Following post-Columbia, he was transferred to Lockheed to support on RCC repair methods. Eventually, he went to work with Jacobs Engineering, providing support to EC5 PLSS hardware development for Constellation. Presently, Mr. Krug is now working as assistant engineer with the Level 3 EVA SE&I group, performing analysis on EVA's spacesuit.
Own space station by 2020. And as a matter of fact, they're putting up a space lab within the next year. They've got 2 modules to be launching towards the end of 2010, and then another manned mission in 2011 to live aboard that space module. And they're going to be practicing docking maneuvers in preparation for building their space station. And they also have plans in parallel for going on a manned mission to the moon around that same time frame. So when we look at the U.S., with the Constellation program being cut and support for ISS going to be cut in 2020, are we even going to have a manned vehicle by 2020? You know, never mind not have the space station anymore. So it's almost like there's an inversion of power, or I should say space leadership that's going on. So it might be something that, you know, we need to continue to look at to monitor and maybe give us another direction on what to do with our space program. But being from the EVA world, my topic is going to be on the EVA side, or the manned program that China has started. Oops. Now, the Chinese had their first EVA. They had a manned launch before this, but the manned EVA was September 27th in 2008. And at that time, there wasn't any information on the Chinese spacesuits. It was a short EVA, lasted about 18 minutes. It was more proof of concept and public relations. And you can see one of their taconauts there. And I think even Nigeria. And also another impressive thing is they have 4 launch control centers. They have 4 centers where they actually launch the rockets on. The 4th one is actually under construction. It's at the southernmost tip of China. Actually, it's on an island just south of China. And that's going to be used for their heavy lift rocket launches. The reason they're building that right now is because it's as close to the equator as they can get, because they use the Earth's motion to assist the launch. The Chinese feel that they're going to get a 14% increase in payload capacity. And some other things that they've done, they've launched a satellite that orbited the moon, and to map out the surface of the moon. And they're continuing. They've got 2 launches, one for a rover and one for a sample return to the moon. So it's an impressive program. And they're also presently building a heavy lift launcher which can lift a 50,000-pound payload, which is comparable to what the shuttle can launch. And that's due in 2014. Now how does this affect us? Where are we in all this? I mean, obviously it might affect the economy a bit because they're trying to grab a share of the market for launching satellites for the rest of the world. It might affect how we view national security. It might even affect NASA's vision for the future. And because we're looking at, from the NASA side, we're slowing down on support for the space station and supposedly going to stop support in the year 2020, whereas China has plans to put up their waving the Chinese flag. what they do in 18 minutes, they released a satellite that was mounted on their spacecraft. It was just a small 88-pound satellite that actually they put into orbit around their spacecraft, and it would take video of their spacecraft from every angle of their EVA. And they also had some solid lubricant experiment going on for some future motion control experiments for later on. Now, it was noticed that the suits looked a lot like the Orlan in the beginning. And in fact, one of the suits was the Orlan. There were 2 crew members that were involved in this EVA, though only one of them really exited the hatch. The one that stayed behind and fed out the umbilical, he was in the Orlan, and that was more as a backup to their new suit, just in case anything would happen. They had already a proven Orlan suit that they felt safe in. They could pull the crew member back in. Now the suits, the name of the suits is the Fei Tian, which means flying in the sky. Actually, Fei means fly. Tian is, I believe, is a female form of the word sky. They also name a Buddhist goddess of that name. And then there was noticed there was a contract between the Chinese and Russia where the Chinese purchased 9 suits and also some 4 sets of docking systems. Now, of the 9 suits they purchased, 3 were Orlans, 2 were their launch entry suits, or the Sokol suits, as the Russians call them, and they had 4 for underwater training. Now, just for those who are unfamiliar with the suits, we did a comparison of the Fei